I trusted my brother with everything. My paychecks, my future, my dreams of finally escaping the cramped apartment we shared in downtown Phoenix. What I didn't know was that every dollar I earned was feeding his gambling addiction while I lived, on instant ramen and false hope. But when our father passed away and left behind $1 million estate, my brother thought he'd hit the jackpot. He had no idea what was coming. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and 6 months ago I thought my biggest problem was working double shifts at the Riverside Medical Center just to keep our lights on. I was 26, exhausted, and foolish enough to believe that family meant something. The arrangement started innocently. Enough. My brother Jake had always been good with numbers. He'd studied accounting at Arizona State before dropping out in his junior year. When I landed my job as a medical assistant, making decent money for the first time in my life, Jake offered to handle our finances. "Let me take care of the bills, Sarah," he'd said, that charming smile of his lighting up our dingy kitchen. "You're working yourself to death. The least I can do is handle the boring stuff." I was grateful. Between my 12-hour shifts at the hospital and the online medical coding courses I was taking at night, I barely had time to sleep, let alone balance checkbooks and pay utilities. So I set up direct deposit straight into a joint account that Jake managed. Every 2 weeks, my $2,800 paycheck would disappear into what I thought was responsible financial planning. "Don't worry about checking the statements," Jake would tell me whenever I asked about our budget. "I've got everything under control. We're even saving money." For 8 months, I lived like a pauper while believing I was building a future. I ate generic cereal for breakfast, packed peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, and convinced myself that my torn scrubs and worn-out shoes were just temporary sacrifices. When my car broke down, Jake assured me he'd handle the repairs from our emergency fund. When I asked about getting our own places eventually, he'd show me printouts of apartment listings and promise we'd have enough for deposits soon. "Just a few more months, Sarah. I'm tracking everything in a spreadsheet. We're almost there." The truth began unraveling on a Tuesday night in March. I'd finished a particularly brutal shift. We'd lost 2 patients that day, and I'd held the hand of an elderly woman as she took her last breath. I came home emotionally drained, wanting nothing more than a hot shower and maybe an actual meal instead of another microwaved burrito. But our electricity had been shut off. I stood in our dark apartment, still in my scrubs, staring at the notice taped to our door. "Final notice, service disconnected for non-payment." According to the paperwork, we owed $847 and hadn't made a payment in 3 months. Jake wasn't home. He'd been going out more frequently lately, always with some excuse about job interviews or meeting friends. I sat on our couch in the dark, using my phone's flashlight to call the electric company. "Ma'am, I show multiple missed payments on this account," the customer service representative told me. "The last payment we received was in December." December, that was 4 months ago. 4 months of paychecks that should have covered our bills, with money to spare. When Jake finally stumbled in at 2 a.m., I was waiting in the dark living room, my phone fully charged from the car adapter. "Sarah, why are you sitting in the dark?" He fumbled for the light switch. "Did the power go out?" "They shut it off, Jake, for non-payment." Even in the dim glow from my phone, I could see his face change. The casual confidence disappeared, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "That's impossible. I paid the electric bill last week." "Show me." "What?" "Show me the bank statements. Show me where you paid for it." For the first time in 8 months, Jake couldn't meet my eyes. "I don't have them with me right now. They're at work." "What work?" "You've been unemployed since Christmas." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Outside, a police siren wailed through the Phoenix night, and somewhere in the building, a baby was crying. Normal sounds of life continuing while mine fell apart. "Jake, where is my money?" He started pacing, running his hands through his dark Hair the way he'd done since we were kids whenever he was about to get in trouble. Okay, look, there's been some complications. I made some investments and they didn't pan out the way I expected. But it's temporary, Sarah. I can fix this. Investments? My voice came out as a whisper. What kind of investments? Stock market stuff. Cryptocurrency. You wouldn't understand the technical aspects, but the point is, I can make it all back. I just need a little more time. Something. Cold and hard settled in my stomach. How much is gone, Jake? It's not gone. It's just tied up temporarily. How much? He stopped pacing. In the glow of my phone screen, he looked younger than his 28 years, like the little boy who used to hide under my bed during thunderstorms. Most of it, he whispered. I felt the world tilt sideways. 8 months of paychecks, 8 months of living like a beggar while he, what? Lost everything on get-rich-quick schemes? I trusted you. The words came out broken. I gave you everything I earned, and you lost it all. I didn't lose it all. Some of it went to bills, rent, and food. It's not like I just threw it away. But even as he said it, pieces were clicking together in my mind. The nights he came home smelling like cigarette smoke and cheap cologne. The way he'd disappear for hours with vague explanations. The phone calls he'd take in the other room, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. You've been gambling? It wasn't a question. The moment I said it, I knew it was true. Jake's face confirmed everything. Sarah, it's not what you think. I had a system. I was winning at first, making real money. If I just had a little more capital to work with. You stole my paychecks to fund your gambling addiction. I didn't steal anything. It was our joint account. And I was going to pay it all back with interest once I hit big. You have to understand, I was so close to breaking even. I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me. Get out! Sarah, come on. Let me explain. Get out! He left that night taking only a duffel bag of clothes and muttering promises that he'd fix everything. I sat alone in the dark apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of my trust and my future, trying to figure out how I'd been so blind. The next morning, I drove to the bank and closed our joint account. The balance was $127.43. 8 months of my life reduced to pocket change. I moved in with my coworker Melissa temporarily, sleeping on her couch and trying to rebuild from nothing. Jake called constantly for the first week, leaving voicemails full of apologies and schemes for making things right. After that, the calls stopped coming. For 3 months, I worked to put my life back together. I found a small studio apartment across town, furnished it with secondhand finds, and slowly began to trust myself again. I threw myself into my job and my studies, determined to prove that I could survive Jake's betrayal. Then, on a humid Thursday morning in June, everything changed again. The call came while I was restocking supplies in exam room 3. My father's lawyer, a man named Henry Blackwood whom I'd met exactly once at Dad's funeral 2 years earlier. Miss Mitchell, I need you to come to my office today if possible. There's been a development regarding your father's estate. I'd assumed Dad's estate was settled long ago. He'd been a mechanic who owned a small garage, and when he died of a heart attack, Jake and I had inherited the business and sold it for enough to cover funeral expenses with a little left over. At least that's what Jake had told me. What kind of development, Mr. Blackwood? I'd rather discuss this in person, Miss Mitchell. Can you be here at 4 o'clock? Henry Blackwood's law office occupied the top floor of a glass building in downtown Phoenix, the kind of place that screamed expensive hourly rates. I sat in the waiting room, still wearing my hospital scrubs because I'd rushed straight from work, wondering what could possibly be left to discuss about Dad's estate. The receptionist, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, offered me coffee, twice before Mr. Blackwood finally emerged from his office. He was younger than I remembered from the funeral, probably in his 40s, with the tired look of someone who dealt with family drama for a living. Miss Mitchell, thank you for coming on such short notice. He gestured toward his office. "Please have a seat." His office was all dark wood and leather-bound books, the kind of space designed to make clients feel like their money was in serious hands. A large window overlooked the city, where the afternoon sun was turning the desert mountains purple in the distance. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Mr. Blackwood, I have to be honest, I thought everything was settled when Dad died. Jake handled most of the paperwork, and we sold the garage to cover expenses. Something flickered across his face. That's exactly what I need to discuss with you, Miss Mitchell. Your brother did handle the initial paperwork, but there were complications. He opened a thick file folder and spread several documents across his desk. Your father's estate was more complex than either of you realized. The garage was just one part of it. My heart started beating faster. What do you mean? Your father was a very private man, Miss Mitchell. Apparently, he didn't share the full extent of his financial situation with you or your brother. Blackwood pulled out a document with an official seal. In addition to the garage, your father owned 3 rental properties in Scottsdale, a commercial building in Tempe that houses 4 businesses, and had several investment accounts that have been accruing interest since his death. The room seemed to spin. That's impossible. Dad was a mechanic. He lived in a tiny house and drove a 20-year-old truck. Your father was indeed a mechanic, but he was also a very shrewd investor. He bought those properties decades ago when prices were low, and he lived modestly while building wealth. According to my records, the total value of his estate is approximately $1.2 million. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. Million? With an M? Yes, Miss Mitchell. And here's where things get complicated. He leaned back in his chair. When your brother came to see me after the funeral, he was eager to handle everything quickly. He claimed you were too grief-stricken to deal with legal matters, and that you'd given him power of attorney to act on your behalf. I never gave him power of attorney. I suspected as much, which is why I required additional documentation before proceeding. Your brother became quite agitated when I insisted on speaking with you directly before distributing any assets. He stormed out of my office and I didn't hear from either of you again until today. So what happened to the estate? Nothing. It's been sitting in probate, waiting for proper administration. Your brother sold the garage. He did have the legal right to do that as a co-inheritor, but the rest of the assets remain untouched. My mind was reeling. While I'd been living on peanut butter sandwiches and sleeping on Melissa's couch, thinking I was broke, there had been over $1 million just sitting there. Why didn't you contact me before now? I tried, Miss Mitchell, multiple times. I sent letters to the address on file, but they were returned as undeliverable. I tried calling, but the phone number had been disconnected. I assumed you'd moved and would contact me when you were ready to deal with your father's affairs. The address on file. Our old apartment, the one I'd fled after discovering Jake's gambling. The phone number that had been shut off along with our electricity. Jake intercepted everything, I said quietly. I believe so, yes. Which brings me to why I finally tracked you down. Blackwood pulled out another document. I hired a private investigator to locate you because there's a time limit on how long an estate can remain in probate. We need to appoint an executor and begin the distribution process, or the state will step in. What does that mean exactly? An executor is the person responsible for managing and distributing the estate according to the will. Your father's will specifies that either you or your brother can serve in this capacity, but it requires a court appointment and ongoing responsibilities. I thought about Jake, wherever he was, probably still gambling away what little money he could get his hands on. What kind of responsibilities? You'd oversee the rental properties, ensure taxes are paid, manage any necessary repairs or improvements, and eventually distribute the assets according to your father's wishes. It's not a small commitment, Miss Mitchell. These properties generate About $8,000 per month in rental income. But they also require active management. $8,000 per month. I made less than that working full-time at the hospital. What did my father's will say about distribution? Blackwood opened another folder. It's quite straightforward. The estate is to be divided equally between you and your brother, with one important provision. The executor receives an additional $50,000 fee for their services, plus a percentage of any increase in property values during their management. So whoever becomes the executor gets more money. Significantly more, yes. Your father was very specific about this. He wanted to ensure that whoever took on the responsibility of managing his legacy would be properly compensated. I sat back, in the leather chair, trying to process everything. A few hours ago, I'd been a broke medical assistant living paycheck to paycheck. Now I was potentially looking at inheriting over $500,000, plus the responsibility of managing properties worth even more. There's something else, Miss Mitchell. Blackwood's expression grew serious. Given the circumstances with your brother's previous behavior, and the fact that he attempted to misrepresent your wishes to me, I feel obligated to tell you that the court will consider character and financial responsibility when appointing an executor. Meaning that if both you and your brother petition for the role, the judge will look at factors like employment history, financial stability, and any relevant legal issues when making the decision. Legal issues, like gambling debts maybe, or lying to lawyers. Mr. Blackwood, hypothetically, what would happen if Jake didn't know about any of this? About the estate still existing? A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. Well, Miss Mitchell, he would need to be notified if you decide to petition for executor status. The court requires all potential heirs to be informed of any proceedings. But until someone files that petition, there's no legal obligation to contact him. I understood. Jake thought the estate was settled. He had no idea there was still over $1 million sitting in legal limbo. How long do I have to decide? I'd recommend filing within the next 2 weeks. After that, the state may intervene, and the process becomes much more complicated. I stood up, my legs unsteady. I need some time to think about this. Of course, but Miss Mitchell. He handed me a business card. Your father worked very hard to build this legacy. He was proud of both his children, but he was also realistic about your different personalities. I think he'd want his assets to be managed by someone who understands the value of hard work and responsible decision-making. Driving back to my studio apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about Dad. He'd always seemed so simple, so straightforward. Every weekend, he'd work on neighbors' cars in his driveway, charging half what the big shops did. He'd pack his lunch in a brown paper bag and wear the same work boots for years until they literally fell apart. But apparently, while Jake and I were growing up thinking we were just getting by, Dad had been quietly building an empire. That night, I called in sick to work for the first time in months and spent hours researching property management, estate law, and executor responsibilities. The rental properties were all in good neighborhoods, currently occupied by long-term tenants. The commercial building housed a small restaurant, a tax preparation service, a yoga studio, and a vintage clothing shop, all with multi-year leases. My father hadn't just left us money. He'd left us a business. By morning, I'd made my decision. I was going to petition the court to become executor of Dad's estate, and Jake was going to find out that his gambling habit had cost him much more than just my trust. It was time for my brother to learn that actions have consequences. Filing the petition to become executor felt like stepping off a cliff. I sat in the Maricopa County Superior Court at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning, watching lawyers in expensive suits rush past with briefcases and determined expressions. My own petition, prepared with Mr. Blackwood's help over the weekend, felt heavy in my hands. The courthouse clerk, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain, reviewed my paperwork with practiced efficiency. Estate of Robert Mitchell, deceased, she read aloud, stamping each page with authority. Petition for letters of administration. This will be assigned to Judge Patricia Hernandez. You'll receive a hearing date within 10 business days. What happens next? All potential heirs must be notified of the proceedings. Do you have current contact information for... She consulted the papers. Jacob Mitchell? My stomach tightened. I have his last known address and phone number, but I'm not sure they're current. We'll send certified mail to the address provided. If it's returned undeliverable, we'll publish a notice in the legal section of the newspaper. He'll have 30 days to respond or contest your petition. 30 days. Jake had 30 days to discover what he'd lost through his gambling addiction. That evening, I was restocking inventory in the hospital supply closet when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Sarah? Jake's voice was different, rougher, more desperate than I remembered. Sarah, is that you? I stepped into an empty patient room and closed the door. Where are you calling from? Look, that doesn't matter right now. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. His breathing was heavy, like he'd been running. Did you file some kind of legal paperwork about Dad's estate? My heart hammered against my ribs. How did you find out? Jesus. Christ, Sarah. How could you do this to me? We're family. Family? I kept my voice low, conscious that patients were trying to rest down the hall. You stole 8 months of my paychecks and left me sitting in the dark with no electricity. Don't talk to me about family. I told you I was going to pay that back, and now you're trying to steal Dad's entire estate from me? Steal? The word came out as a harsh whisper. Jake, you tried to lie to Mr. Blackwood about having power of attorney. You intercepted legal documents that were meant for both of us. You're the thief in this family, not me. Silence stretched across the connection. When Jake spoke again, his tone had shifted from desperate to calculating. How much is it, Sarah? The estate. I know it's more than just the garage. I almost laughed. Even now, facing the consequences of his actions, he was still looking for an angle. Why don't you ask Mr. Blackwood? I'm sure he'd love to hear from you again. Come on, Sarah. We can work this out between us. We don't need lawyers and courts. Getting involved, whatever it is, we'll split it 50-50, just like Dad wanted. I'll even give you an extra cut for your trouble. My trouble? I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. Jake, I've been living on Melissa's couch for 3 months because of what you did to me. I've been working double shifts just to afford groceries, and now you want to give me an extra cut of money that's rightfully mine anyway? Look, I know I messed up with your paychecks, but that was different. I was in a bad place, making poor decisions. This is Dad's legacy we're talking about. He wouldn't want us fighting over it. The manipulation was so familiar, so practiced, that for a moment, I almost fell for it. Jake had always been good at making his problems seem like everyone else's responsibility. You're right, I said quietly. Dad wouldn't want us fighting. That's why he set up the will to ensure his estate would be managed by someone responsible. What's that supposed to mean? It means the executor gets compensated for their work, Jake. And after what you did with my money, I don't think a judge is going to trust you with Dad's. The line went dead. Over the next week, Jake called 6 more times from different numbers. The conversations followed the same pattern. Attempts at reconciliation followed by increasingly desperate bargaining. Then anger when I refused to withdraw my petition. By Thursday, he'd escalated to threats. You have no idea what you're messing with, Sarah. I've got connections now, people who don't like being disappointed. If this estate is worth what I think it is, walking away isn't an option for me. I reported. The threatening calls to both Mr. Blackwood and the police. The officer who took my statement, Detective Maria Santos, was a woman about my age with tired eyes and a matter-of-fact manner. Unfortunately, he hasn't made any specific threats of violence, she explained. But we'll document everything in case the pattern escalates. In the meantime, I'd recommend changing your phone number and being extra cautious about your personal security. He's my brother. He wouldn't actually hurt me. Detective Santos gave me a look I'd seen on the faces of emergency room nurses. The expression of someone who'd seen too much family drama turn ugly. Miss Mitchell, addiction changes people. And when large amounts of money are involved, family relationships can deteriorate quickly. Just be careful. That weekend, Mr. Blackwood called with an update. Jake has hired an attorney, he informed me. A man named Douglas Webb. I'm familiar with his work. He specializes in estate contests and has a reputation for aggressive tactics. What does that mean for my petition? It means your brother is planning to fight this. Mr. Webb has filed a counter-petition claiming that Jake should be appointed executor, along with a motion alleging that you're attempting to defraud the estate. My blood ran cold. Fraud? It's a standard tactic in these cases, Miss Mitchell. He's claiming that you've been secretly aware of the estate's value all along and have been manipulating the situation for personal gain. It's baseless, but it will require us to provide documentation proving otherwise. What kind of documentation? Bank records showing your financial situation over the past several months, employment records, testimony from witnesses who can speak to your character and your brother's gambling problems. We need to build a comprehensive case demonstrating why you're the more suitable candidate. That night, I spread all my financial documents across my tiny kitchen table. Bank statements showing my account balance dropping to double digits, receipts for generic food and thrift store clothes, pay stubs from the hospital documenting every overtime shift I'd worked to make ends meet while Jake was gambling away my future. The paper trail told a clear story of someone struggling to survive, not someone secretly scheming to steal an inheritance. But, as I organized the evidence, a darker realization settled over me. Jake had hired Douglas Webb, a lawyer who specialized in estate disputes. That kind of legal representation wasn't cheap, especially for someone who'd claimed to be broke when he disappeared 3 months ago. Where had Jake gotten the money to hire an expensive attorney? I thought about his phone calls, the comment about having connections and people who don't like being disappointed. Jake had always been a small-time gambler. Poker games with friends, sports betting, maybe the occasional trip to a casino. But his desperation and the resources he seemed to have access to now suggested something much more serious. My brother hadn't just developed a gambling problem. He'd gotten involved with people who made their living off other people's addictions. And now, with over $1 million at stake, he'd convinced them that this estate was his ticket to paying off whatever debts he owed. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. As I prepared my testimony and gathered character witnesses, one thought kept running through my mind. Jake wasn't just fighting for his half of Dad's estate anymore. He was fighting for his life, and he was willing to destroy me to save himself. Key. Morning of the hearing, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror practicing what I would say to the judge. My hands shook as I applied mascara, and I had to redo it twice because my eyes kept watering from nerves. I'd bought my first business suit the day before, a navy blue ensemble from a discount store that made me look more professional than I felt. Mr. Blackwood had prepared me extensively, but nothing could ease the knot in my stomach as I walked into Judge Patricia Hernandez's courtroom at 9 a.m. sharp. Jake was already there. I almost didn't recognize him at first. The brother I remembered had always been handsome in an effortless way. Tall, dark-haired, with the kind of smile that made people trust him immediately. The man sitting at the defendant's table looked like a shadow of that person. His suit was expensive but hung loosely on his frame as if he'd lost significant weight. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly as he shuffled through papers with his attorney. Douglas Webb, Jake's lawyer, was everything Mr. Blackwood had warned me about. Silver-haired, sharp-featured, with the predatory confidence of someone who made a living turning family disputes into warfare. He whispered something to Jake, who glanced in my direction and quickly looked away. Judge Hernandez was a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd presided over thousands of family disputes. She reviewed the case file for several minutes before addressing the courtroom. We're here to determine the appointment of an executor for the estate of Robert Mitchell, deceased. I have competing petitions from his two children, Sarah Mitchell and Jacob Mitchell. She looked up from her papers. Mr. Blackwood, you may present your case. For the next hour, Mr. Blackwood methodically laid out why I should be appointed executor. He presented my employment records, character references from my supervisor at the hospital, bank statements showing my financial responsibility despite limited income, and testimony from Melissa about how I'd handled the aftermath of Jake's betrayal. Your Honor, Blackwood concluded, Sarah Mitchell has demonstrated consistent responsibility, employment stability, and financial integrity. She has managed to rebuild her life from nothing after her brother's gambling addiction destroyed her savings. She represents exactly the kind of steady, trustworthy management this estate requires. Then it was Douglas Webb's turn. Your Honor, my client Jacob Mitchell is the elder sibling and has experience in financial management, having studied accounting at Arizona State University. Webb's voice was smooth, practiced. The petitioner's claims about gambling addiction are unsubstantiated allegations designed to malign my client's character. He pulled out a folder thick with documents. Furthermore, we have evidence suggesting that Miss Mitchell has not been entirely truthful about her knowledge of this estate's value or her motivations for seeking executor status. My heart stopped. What evidence could he possibly have? Your Honor, we've discovered that Miss Mitchell had been in contact with financial institutions regarding her father's accounts as early as 6 months ago, well before she claims to have learned about the estate's true value. Mr. Blackwood shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is the first we're hearing of any such evidence, and it hasn't been properly disclosed during discovery. Judge Hernandez frowned. Mr. Webb, what specific evidence are you referring to? Webb produced a document with a flourish. A credit report inquiry, Your Honor, showing that Miss Mitchell requested information about accounts associated with Robert Mitchell's Social Security number in January of this year. The blood drained from my face. January. That was when I'd been trying to figure out why our joint account had no money, desperately searching for any financial records that might explain Jake's lies. Mr. Blackwood was already moving. Your Honor, I'd like to examine this document and question the witness about the circumstances of this inquiry. Granted. Miss Mitchell, please take the stand. Walking to the witness stand felt like moving through water. Jake still wouldn't meet my eyes, but I could see Webb whispering urgently to him. Miss Mitchell, Mr. Blackwood began gently, can you explain the circumstances that led to this credit inquiry in January? I took a deep breath, remembering his coaching about staying calm and truthful. I was trying to understand why our joint checking account had no money despite my regular paychecks. Jake had been managing our finances, and when I questioned him about missing funds, he became evasive. I was looking for any bank accounts or financial records that might explain the discrepancy. Did you find any information about your father's estate during this search? No. The credit report showed accounts I didn't recognize, but Jake assured me they were old closed accounts from before Dad died. I trusted his explanation. Webb stood for cross-examination, his expression predatory. Miss Mitchell, isn't it true that you discovered the estate's value months ago and have been planning this legal action ever since? No, that's absolutely false. Then explain why you waited until now to contact Mr. Blackwood about estate matters. I didn't know there were any estate matters to discuss. Jake told me everything had been settled. How convenient. Webb's tone was mocking. And I suppose it's also convenient that you've portrayed yourself as financially destitute while secretly knowing you stood to inherit over $1 million? I didn't know about the inheritance. I've been living paycheck to paycheck because my brother stole my savings to fund his gambling. Allegedly stole, Miss Mitchell. And speaking of allegations, isn't it true that you've been spreading false rumors about my client's supposed gambling problem to damage his reputation, Mr. Blackwood objected again, but the damage was being done. Webb was painting me as a manipulative liar who'd orchestrated this entire situation for personal gain. Then something unexpected happened. "Your Honor?" Jake suddenly stood up, his voice cracking. "I need to say something." Webb grabbed his arm. "Jacob, we discussed this. Let me handle—" "No." Jake shook him off. "I can't do this anymore." Judge Hernandez leaned forward. "Mr. Mitchell, you're not currently under oath, but anything you say will be part of the court record. Do you understand?" "I understand." Jake's hands were shaking violently now. "Your Honor, my sister is telling the truth about everything. I did steal her paychecks. I do have a gambling problem. And I lied to Mr. Blackwood about having power of attorney." The courtroom was dead silent. Webb looked like he'd been slapped. "Jake, don't," I whispered, but he was already continuing. "I've been getting threats, Your Honor. People I owe money to. Serious people who don't care about family or legal proceedings. When I found out about this estate, I thought it was my salvation. But watching my sister sit there, listening to my lawyer try to destroy her character for something I did." He wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "She's been covering for me our whole lives. Even now, she hasn't told anyone about the worst of it." "What do you mean, Mr. Mitchell?" the judge asked quietly. Jake looked directly at me for the first time all day. "I didn't just gamble away Sarah's paychecks, Your Honor. I took out credit cards in her name, forged her signature on loan applications. By the time she discovered the missing money, I'd destroyed her credit and put her in debt for over $30,000 she doesn't even know about yet." The courtroom erupted. Webb was frantically trying to control his client, Mr. Blackwood was objecting to the unsworn testimony, and I sat in the witness stand feeling like the world had tilted off its axis. Jake owed dangerous people money, and he'd been willing to commit identity theft and fraud to feed his addiction. But in the end, he couldn't watch me be destroyed for his crimes. Judge Hernandez banged her gavel for silence. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to recommend that you speak with a criminal defense attorney immediately. This hearing is recessed for 1 hour while I review these new developments." As the courtroom cleared, Jake approached me slowly, his expensive suit now looking like a costume he was desperate to shed. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to know that I'm done lying." I stared at my brother. This stranger who'd stolen my identity, ruined my credit, and nearly convinced a courtroom that I was the villain in our story. $30,000, Jake. He nodded miserably. "The credit card companies will start calling soon. I kept making minimum payments with casino winnings, but—" He shrugged helplessly. "You destroyed my entire financial future." "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right, I promise." For a moment, I saw the little boy who used to hide under my bed during thunderstorms, the teenager who'd cried when Dad taught him to change oil because he was afraid of disappointing him. But I also saw the man who'd stolen my paychecks, lied to lawyers, and put me $30,000 in debt I didn't know existed. "Jake," I said quietly, "I hope you get help. I really do. But I never want to see you again." When court reconvened, Judge Hernandez's decision was swift and definitive. I was appointed executor of Dad's estate with full authority to manage the properties and distribute assets according to the will. Jake's confession had eliminated any question about my character or qualifications, but as I walked out of the courthouse as the legal guardian of $1 million legacy, all I could think about was the financial time bomb Jake had left in my name, waiting to explode. The credit card statements arrived exactly 1 week after the court hearing, stuffed into my mailbox like toxic confetti. Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover. 7 different companies demanding payment on accounts I'd never opened. The numbers swam before my eyes. $4,200, $6,800, $3,950, $7,100. Jake hadn't been exaggerating. The total debt in my name was $31,847. I spread the statements across my kitchen table next to the official court documents naming me executor of Dad's estate. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was now responsible for managing over $1 million, while simultaneously being dunned for debt I'd never incurred. My phone rang constantly. Debt collectors with Indian accents and Midwestern politeness, all asking for Sarah Mitchell, all confused when I explained that the charges weren't mine. The fraud department representatives were more helpful, but required extensive documentation to prove identity theft, police reports, sworn affidavits, notarized statements from witnesses who could verify my whereabouts during specific purchases. "Ma'am, I show a charge for $2,400 at the Talking Stick Resort Casino on March 15th, a Wells Fargo investigator named Kevin explained during one particularly surreal phone call. "Can you provide an alibi for that date?" I pulled up my work schedule on my phone. I was at Riverside Medical Center from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. that day. Double shift. I can provide timesheets and witness statements from my supervisor. And the $800 charge at Morton's Steakhouse in Scottsdale on March 20th? Working again. "Kevin, I haven't eaten at a restaurant that cost more than $15 in over 2 years. The process was exhausting, humiliating, and expensive. Each police report cost $25. Notarizing documents required time off work. Credit monitoring services to prevent future fraud ran $40 per month. Jake's addiction was still costing me money even after he'd disappeared back into whatever hole he'd crawled out of. But gradually, methodically, I began dismantling the financial bomb he'd left in my name. Meanwhile, Dad's estate demanded attention. Mr. Blackwood introduced me to Patricia Chen, a property management specialist who'd been handling Dad's rentals on a contract basis since his death. Patricia was a sharp woman in her 30s who drove a Tesla and wore designer suits that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Your father was an excellent landlord," she explained as we toured the Scottsdale properties on a Thursday morning. "He kept rents slightly below market rate to ensure good tenants, and he reinvested profits into maintenance and improvements. That's why these properties have been appreciated so much." The first house was a 3-bedroom ranch in a neighborhood of mature trees and well-maintained lawns. The tenants, an elderly couple named the Williamses, had lived there for 8 years and treated the place like their own. Mrs. Williams had planted a vegetable garden in the backyard and painted the kitchen a cheerful yellow with Dad's permission. "Your father was such a kind man," she told me as we stood in the updated kitchen. "When my husband had his heart surgery last year, your dad didn't raise our rent, even though similar houses were going for $300 more per month. He said family comes before profit." The second property housed a young family with twin toddlers. The father, Marcus, worked as a firefighter and showed me the swing set Dad had installed in the backyard when the children were born. "He said every kid needs a place to play," Marcus explained. "Didn't charge us extra for it or anything." The third rental was occupied by a graduate student named Elena, who was finishing her PhD in environmental engineering. She'd converted the garage into a workshop where she built solar panel prototypes for her research. Dad had not only approved the conversion but helped her install the electrical connections. "He was fascinated by my work," Elena said, showing me rows of gleaming solar cells. "He said he wished he'd learned more about renewable energy when he was younger. He was planning to put solar panels on all his properties. At each house I heard the same story. Dad had been more than a landlord. He'd been a mentor, a friend, sometimes almost a father figure to his tenants. He'd collected modest rents, while ensuring people had stable, comfortable homes. The commercial building in Tempe told a similar story. The restaurant owner, a Vietnamese immigrant named Lynn, had struggled during the pandemic shutdowns. Instead of evicting her, Dad had negotiated a temporary rent reduction and connected her with small business loan programs. She was now thriving, again, serving some of the best po in the valley. The tax preparation service was run by a retired accountant who'd become Dad's close friend. "Robert taught me more about real estate than I ever learned in business school," he said. "He had an instinct for good investments and good people." As I learned about Dad's business philosophy, I realized he'd left me more than money and properties. He'd left me a template for how to build wealth while helping others build better lives. The executor fee and my inheritance share totaled just over $700,000 after taxes and legal expenses. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having, but it came with responsibilities I was still learning to navigate. My first major decision was what to do about Jake. Legally, he was still entitled to his half of the estate, roughly $400,000, after the executor fees and expenses. Despite everything he'd done, Dad's will was clear about the distribution. But I also knew that giving Jake access to that much money in his current state would be like handing him a loaded gun. The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Rebecca Foster, an addiction specialist at Phoenix Recovery Center, returned my call on a Friday evening as I was reviewing rental applications for a newly vacated property. "Miss Mitchell, your brother has been in our residential treatment program for 2 weeks now. He's asked me to contact you about establishing a trust fund for his portion of your father's estate." I nearly dropped the phone. "Jake is in rehab?" "Yes. He checked himself involuntarily the day after your court hearing. He's been very forthcoming about his gambling addiction, the identity theft, and his desire to make amends. He specifically requested that his inheritance be managed through a trust that would prevent him from accessing large amounts of cash while he's in recovery." "For how long?" "He's proposed a 10-year structure where he receives monthly payments, sufficient to cover basic living expenses, with the remainder invested conservatively. After 10 years of documented sobriety, he would gain full access to the principal." It was a reasonable proposal, and honestly more maturity than I'd expected from Jake. Through Dr. Foster, we worked out the details. Jake would receive $2,000 per month from his trust, enough to rent a modest apartment and cover necessities, but not enough to fund serious gambling. The rest would be invested in index funds and treasury bonds. More importantly, if he completed the full treatment program and demonstrated 6 months of sobriety, I agreed to consider dropping the identity theft charges I'd filed. His criminal record would be clean if he could prove he was committed to recovery. "Why are you doing this for him?" Dr. Foster asked during one of our conversations. "Many family members in your situation would write their sibling off completely," I thought. About Dad, working in his garage every weekend, building something lasting with his hands. Because that's what family means. Not enabling destructive behavior, but not giving up on someone either. 6 months later, I'd settled into my new life as a property manager and investor. The fraud investigations had cleared my credit, and I'd purchased a small house in a quiet Phoenix neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I'd left my job at the hospital to focus on managing Dad's properties and had started taking business courses at the local community college. Jake completed his 90-day residential program and moved into a sober living facility. We talked occasionally, stiff, careful conversations about his progress and the practical aspects of the trust fund. The easy closeness we'd shared as children was gone, maybe forever, but we were rebuilding something different, something based on honesty instead of enabling. The monthly rental income from Dad's properties was enough to live comfortably while I reinvested profits into improvements and new acquisitions. I'd followed Elena's suggestion and installed solar panels on 2 of the properties, reducing operating costs while increasing their value. The graduate student had been right. Dad would have approved. On the anniversary of the court hearing, I drove to Dad's grave for the first time since the funeral. The headstone was simple granite with his name, dates, and the inscription, "Beloved Father." I brought a small bouquet of sunflowers, his favorite, and sat in the grass beside his grave. "I think I'm finally understanding what you were trying to teach us," I said aloud, feeling slightly foolish but needing to say the words. It wasn't about the money, was it? It was about using whatever resources you have to make other people's lives a little better. A warm breeze rustled the desert plants around the cemetery. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sounds of Phoenix continuing its daily rhythm, traffic, construction, the ordinary noise of people building their lives. I'd started with, Nothing but stolen paychecks and a brother's betrayal. Dad's hidden legacy had given me financial security, but more than that, it had shown me a different way to think about success. Not just accumulating wealth, but creating value for others. In the process, Jake was learning to rebuild his life one day at a time. I was learning to manage mine one decision at a time. And somewhere, Dad's tenants were coming home to comfortable houses and successful businesses, probably never knowing how their landlord's final gift had transformed his daughter's understanding of what it means to leave a lasting legacy. The real inheritance wasn't the money. It was the knowledge that you can build something meaningful from the ground up, brick by brick, choice by choice, if you're willing to do the work and help others along the way. 2 years had passed since that day in Judge Hernandez's courtroom, and I'd built something I never thought possible. A real life. Not just survival, but genuine success on my own terms. The girl who used to eat peanut butter sandwiches for dinner now owned 5 rental properties across Phoenix and Scottsdale, with a 6th under contract. But the universe wasn't done with surprises. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing applications for my newest property, a 4-bedroom house in a family neighborhood where I planned to continue Dad's tradition of below-market rents for good tenants. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Sarah Mitchell? This is Agent David Rodriguez with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. I need to speak with you about your brother, Jacob Mitchell. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. Is Jake okay? That's what I need to discuss with you. In person. Can you meet me at our Phoenix field office this afternoon? 3 hours later, I sat in a sterile conference room across from Agent Rodriguez, a serious man in his 40s with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who'd seen too much white-collar crime. Miss Mitchell, your brother has been cooperating with an ongoing federal investigation into an illegal gambling operation run by the Torino crime family. The casino debts that led to his difficulties with you were just the beginning of a much larger criminal enterprise. He slid a thick folder across the table. Jake wasn't just a victim of this organization. Over the past 3 years, he was laundering money through various financial instruments, including the identity theft he committed against you. The room seemed to tilt. Laundering money? The credit cards he opened in your name, the loans he secured. That wasn't just to fund his gambling addiction. He was moving cash for loan sharks and illegal bookmakers, using your clean credit history to legitimize dirty money. The debt he left you with was actually payment for services rendered. I stared at the documents, seeing Jake's handwriting on applications I'd never signed. My forged signature authorizing transactions that had nothing to do with feeding slot machines. How long have you known about this? Jake approached us 18 months ago, shortly after completing his rehabilitation program. He provided evidence that helped us understand the scope of this operation. Miss Mitchell, your brother's cooperation has been instrumental in dismantling a money laundering network that was moving over $50 million annually. Agent Rodriguez opened another file. The Torinos were using gambling addicts as unwitting money launderers. They'd provide cash to cover gambling debts, then require the addicts to clean that money through legitimate financial channels. Mortgages, business loans, credit cards. Your identity theft wasn't random desperation. It was a calculated business decision. My hands were shaking as I processed this information. You're saying Jake was a criminal. He was both a victim and a criminal, Miss Mitchell. His gambling addiction made him vulnerable to exploitation, but he made conscious choices to involve you and other family members in illegal activities. The important thing now is that he's been helping us build cases against the people who run this operation. What does that mean for him? Jake has been in federal witness protection for the past 6 months, preparing to testify in a series of trials that begin next month. His cooperation agreement includes immunity from prosecution for the financial crimes, but he's required to make full restitution to all victims, including you. Agent Rodriguez slid another document across the table. It was a cashier's check made out to me for $127,000. This represents the principal and interest on the fraudulent debts, plus damages for the impact on your credit and financial stability. There's also this. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Jake's familiar handwriting. I opened it with trembling fingers. Sarah, I know this letter can't undo what I did to you, and I know the money can't repair the trust I broke. But I wanted you to understand that everything I told you in court that day was true, except it was worse than I admitted. I wasn't just gambling away your paychecks. I was helping criminals steal from innocent people, and I used your name and credit to do it. The Torinos convinced me that I was just moving money around, that nobody was getting hurt. I told myself I was going to pay you back and everything would be fine. The truth is, I was terrified of what they'd do to me if I didn't cooperate. But I was even more terrified of admitting to you that I wasn't just weak, I was a criminal. Working with the FBI has given me a chance to do something right for the first time in years. The trials are going to put these people away for decades. Kids won't grow up watching their parents destroyed by loan sharks. Families won't lose their homes to predatory lending schemes. I know you probably never want to see me again, and I understand that. But I needed you to know that your strength gave me the courage to finally tell the truth. Watching you rebuild your life from nothing, seeing you turn Dad's legacy into something beautiful, it showed me that people can change if they're willing to do the work. Thank you for not giving up on me completely, even when I deserved it. Your brother, Jake P.S. I heard about your solar panel project. Dad would be proud. I sat in that sterile FBI conference room, holding a check for more money than I'd made in 3 years, and felt something I hadn't experienced since before Jake's first disappearance. Genuine hope for my brother's future. What happens to him after the trials? I asked. Witness protection typically lasts until the threat is neutralized. Given the scope of these prosecutions, that could be several years. After that, he's free to rebuild his life wherever he chooses. Agent Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. Miss Mitchell, I've worked on financial crimes for 15 years. I've seen families destroyed by addiction and fraud. What's unusual about your case is how you managed to not only survive your brother's betrayal, but use it as motivation to build something positive. I had help. My father left me more than money. He left me an example of how to treat people. Your brother mentioned that. He said you continued your father's practice of below-market rents and tenant support programs. I nodded. Dad taught me that real wealth comes from helping others succeed. The rental income is nice, but seeing families thrive in stable housing, that's the real return on investment. Agent Rodriguez smiled for the first time during our meeting. Your brother said you'd say something like that. He wanted me to tell you that he's been volunteering with a financial literacy program in witness protection, teaching other recovering addicts how to manage money responsibly. 3 months later, I received a postcard with no return address. The front showed a mountain landscape somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. On the back, in Jake's handwriting, 6 months sober, teaching a budgeting class at the community center, thinking about getting a dog. Hope you're well. Jay, I pinned it to the bulletin board in my home office, next to photos of Dad and articles about my properties being featured in a local magazine as examples of community-focused real estate investment. The FBI trials concluded successfully. 15 members of the Torino organization received sentences ranging from 5 to 25 years. The money laundering network was dismantled, protecting countless future victims from the scheme that had nearly destroyed my family. Jake's testimony had been crucial to the convictions, according to a brief news article that mentioned him only as a cooperating witness who had been exploited by the criminal organization. The restitution money allowed me to accelerate my investment plans. I purchased a small apartment complex in a transitional neighborhood, implementing Dad's philosophy on a larger scale. Instead of gentrifying the area and displacing existing residents, I kept rents affordable while upgrading units and common areas. The complex became a model for sustainable community development, attracting attention from urban planning students and housing advocacy groups. But the most satisfying moment came when I hired my first employee, a young woman named Christina, who reminded me of myself 2 years earlier. She was working multiple jobs to support her family while taking night classes in business administration. I offered her a position as my assistant property manager, with a salary that would let her focus on her studies and career development. "Why are you taking a chance on someone with no experience?" she asked during her interview. "Because someone believed in me when I had nothing but determination," I told her. "Now it's my turn to pass that forward." On the second anniversary of Dad's estate settlement, I stood in the backyard of my latest property, a duplex that would house 2 young families at rates they could actually afford. The solar panels I'd installed gleamed in the Arizona sunshine, and the small garden I'd planted was beginning to flourish in the desert heat. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Celebrated 2 years sober yesterday. Got that? Dog, a golden retriever named Hope. Thank you for believing people can change." Jay, I typed back. "Congratulations. Dad would be proud of both of us." The reply came quickly. "He'd be especially proud of you. You turned his legacy into something even better than he imagined." I looked around at the property, thinking about the families who would call it home, the stable foundation it would provide for their dreams and ambitions. Jake was right. This wasn't just Dad's legacy anymore. It was mine too, built from the ashes of betrayal and the determination to create something meaningful from the wreckage. My brother had stolen my paychecks and nearly destroyed my life, but in trying to rebuild from his betrayal, I'd discovered something more valuable than any inheritance. The knowledge that you can choose to let tragedy make you bitter, or you can use it as raw material to build something beautiful. The revenge I'd gotten wasn't the kind you see in movies, dramatic and immediate. It was quieter, more profound. I'd taken the worst thing Jake ever did to me and transformed it into the foundation of a life I could be proud of. And maybe, somewhere in witness protection with his golden retriever and his budgeting classes, my brother was learning the same lesson, that the best revenge against your past mistakes is building a future worth living. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.